Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another evening with Blockchain Braun. It's good to have you here again. If you would please, as you come into the video, if you would smash up the like buttons, subscribe and share with a friend, I would greatly appreciate it. Also as well, make sure you hit the notification bell. That way each time I upload a video, you'll be informed immediately. All right, guys, let's go. Let's get into it. Tonight, I wanted to have a discussion about tit for tariff. Is the United States playing a dangerous game of chicken? So let's talk about it. Let's start with a history lesson that perfectly illustrates what can go wrong with tariffs. Enter the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. During the Great Depression, two well-meaning politicians thought they could protect American jobs by raising tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. Spoiler alert, it backfired spectacularly. Other countries retaliated, international trade plummeted by 66%, and the Great Depression got even worse. Think of tariffs as an economic game of chicken. It's an economic tug of war of sorts. Who's going to fold first? Who's going to benefit first? Those are the type of things that tariffs can do when you're going back and forth and when you're trying to play this game of chicken. And it can wind up ending very badly. Well, let's talk about it. Let's go through the scenarios here. Let's talk about it. And we're going to get into the pros and cons of it too as well. So let's go to the next topic of discussion that I would like to mention during this video tonight. All right, so let's get into it. Let's look at trade by the numbers. So, America's biggest trading buddies, and I took the numbers from the year of 2023. So America's biggest trading buddy is Mexico at around 16% of total U.S. trade, and that adds up to around $798 billion. Next on the list would be Canada, which is around 14% of total U.S. trade, and that adds up to around $773 billion. And of course, third on the list, which we all know, we all talk about them all the time, is China at around 11% of total U.S. trade, and that's around $575 billion. Now, the thing about China is a couple of interesting things about China, which we should know already. China has the biggest population of people in the world, followed second, close second actually, by India. It's just that India doesn't have the infrastructure that China has. So China has the biggest population of people in the world. And they have positioned themselves in a way economically that challenges America for that number one spot. And we're going to get into that too as well. Now, the thing about putting tariffs on China, and I'll go ahead and mention this, is that when you put tariffs on China, you're playing a dangerous game, I believe, for the simple fact that China is the biggest trading partner with just about every country in the world. The biggest trading partner with every country in the world. And they produce the most goods and services by a long shot. And so when you're dealing with those dynamics, you're dealing with the fact that now they're looking to start their own economic platform in the BRICS. They're looking to get away from the US dollar. And I'll get into why that is happening. A few reasons why, but I'll get into the most important reason why that is happening. But they're looking to get into that number one spot as the top economic power in the world. A few things they have to work out from a strategical standpoint, and they have to work out their dual currency situation. They have the yuan, then they have the renminbi. So they have like a dual currency society. And in a point, because I do think they're trying to be the world reserve currency, which we hold that spot right now, which I believe that's keeping our head above water, to be honest with you, because it is the ability to print money that has us in that number one spot. But this is the thing about that. The moment we stop being the world reserve currency, things will go downhill very quickly for us. Being as we're in close to $37 trillion in debt, and the only reason that we're able to overcome that is our ability to print money. But you should know as well as I do, if you don't, you need to do some research on it. But the more you print money and you put more money into circulation, the more you debase your currency. And you're going to get to the point to where it's not worth hardly anything of what it used to be. And when you get to that point, and it's happened during the Dutch regime, it happened during Great Britain, it's happening with the United States of America. And the reason I mentioned those other two countries or those other two superpowers is because they too were once the world reserve currency. They too were once the economic power. But because of the overspending, because of the over borrowing, they begin to overprint their money. And because of it, they begin to lose value. Their money began to lose value over time significantly, which led to internal conflict within those countries, which then led to World War. And then after World War, there was a total reconstruction of their economy, of their country, the whole nine. And then up the curve comes another superpower, which would have been the United States. And we were established to be the world reserve currency in the 1944 meeting of Bretton Woods. And during that time, our money was backed by gold. But then when we stopped the gold standard in 1971, I believe, or 1970, might have been 70, 71, somewhere in there, when we stopped the gold standard, then really, to be honest with you guys, we began to go downhill from there. So there's been kind of a slow leak of it, but we've done some things over time to keep us in this number one spot. However, if we continue to make certain decisions, that can change. So having said that, let's get into the next topic of discussion about this tariff situation. So we talked about the trade by the numbers. So these three countries that I talked about, they make up over 40% of America's total trade. So that's the equivalent of having three of your best friends take up close to half or over half of your social time. That's pretty significant, isn't it? So that's just kind of a easy way to look at it, I would say. But these are significant trading partners. And as much as possible, we do not want to fracture that relationship. But we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about some more things here in a little bit. So let's get into the next topic of discussion here. So let's look at a trade war scenario. Now, let's look at something here, which we already see some reciprocation from the tariffs that have been implemented. But let's say China. Let's say that brand new iPhone that you have costs $1,000. Let's say at some point, China, because of its displeasure of the tariffs that we are implementing on them, let's say they increase their tariff on us 100%. Then what that means is the $1,000 iPhone that you just purchased, now you have to pay $2,000 for. That's crazy, isn't it? Now, we see that as a retaliatory measure, China has implemented tariffs on the United States. And I want to say, I have to look at the number, but I would encourage you guys to do your own research on this. But I believe that China, in reciprocation of the additional 34% tariff that we put on them, because it was 20%. And then there was an additional 34% tariff that was put on China, which increased it to 54%. So I believe in a retaliatory measure, they put a 34% tariff on us already. And so these are the type of issues you can run into when you're playing this dangerous game of economic tariff chicken. So that's one scenario I wanted to talk about. But it's not just things like iPhones, but your apparel that you're wearing. When you had maybe the means of buying certain things, shoes, clothes, anything of that nature. But now those things that you were able to buy, they have become unaffordable. Cars, you name it. Those particular things that maybe were attainable, but due to tariffs, they're not as attainable anymore. So that's really scary to think about, I guess, from that standpoint, depending on how long you can endure something of that nature. But we're going to talk about, again, the pros and cons of tariffs. Just not going to just con it all the way out, but we have to be honest about things. So let's get into the next topic of discussion here. So before we do, let me say this. And going back to that scenario. So you're not just talking about iPhones. You're not just talking about clothes and apparel, but also you can be talking about manufacturing components too as well. You can be talking about things like in certain countries, you could be talking about oil or any goods and services that you could think about. So in that manufacturing component, let's get into that. American manufacturing. One of the reasons it was said that tariffs are being implemented is to bring back corporations here to America, to encourage them to build domestically instead of going overseas to build and to produce. Which, in theory, okay, that's a great thing. Because one thing I think that has hurt Americans and that has hurt us as a country is that we don't produce like we used to do. We are not the biggest producers anymore. That particular title goes to China. They are the biggest producer of goods and services. America used to be. If you go back years and years ago, decades ago, and you go back to like our kind of industrial revolution when we were creating railroads, we were creating cars, we created an innovative flight. You had Einstein, who was a math whiz, and you had Edison and Nikola Tesla and people of that nature that were doing some fantastic things in innovation. We don't innovate and produce like that anymore. You look at the corporations that we have, when you talk about Ford and Chrysler and all of these big corporations here in my city, unfortunately, I'm going to mention this because this was our biggest industrial thing. We had R.J. Reynolds. And so R.J. Reynolds, you think about Winston Cup, you think about Salem, you think about Camel. We were big in tobacco and it fueled our economy. I know people like to talk about race relations and things of this nature, and we know we still have some things that we need to work on. But here in my city, we had a thriving, when I mean thriving, Black economy here in Winston-Salem. We had a thriving economic makeup in general in the city of Winston-Salem. And Black people live really well. Then you had the hospital dynamic with Baptist Hospital, and then you had Forsyth Hospital, which employed a lot of people. So we had some Black people that were doing very well. I also did a video on how we were the headquarters for Safe Bus Company, which was the biggest and the first, and I don't know if any since, before or after, only Black owned transit authority in the world and the biggest. So much so that it got to the point that Safe Bus Company was the transit authority for the whole city, both black and white people. That's how well people were doing down here. So having said that, in theory, bringing corporations back here to produce is a great thing. But this is the thing about that. Will you get to the point to where you'll be able to do that? Will these tariffs cripple you to the point to where people aren't even thinking about corporations being brought over here? You don't want to get to the point to where people are thinking about how are we going to survive, because the tariffs are hurting so much, and it's hitting the bottom line so much, it's hitting the pockets of the people so much that they're not even thinking about the backside of that as far as what can happen and how it will be beneficial. And so I think we have to be careful in that aspect. But again, we're going to get into the pros and cons of this. So, but those are some things to think about. But a lot of companies did leave here. We don't produce like we do anymore. And that's one reason we need to get back to production. Because the bottom line is we have a big deficit, which if we don't do some drastic things to cut into this debt that's very close to $37 trillion, then our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren, generations to come, someone's going to have to pay that bill. And this is the thing. If some drastic measures aren't taken at some point in time, and the sooner the better, right now is a good time to do it. Now, what President Trump and his administration is doing, we don't know if it's going to work yet. We have to give it time. But something has to be done. Because if you don't cut into this debt right now, if you don't cut into this deficit, then somewhere down the road, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, children, someone's going to have to pay that bill. America's not going to be what it used to be. China's moving up into that spot of the economic superpower, and it may be inevitable. But if we begin to cut into this deficit and make some hard decisions now, then going forward into the future will look brighter. But the more we don't do it, the future will look significantly dimmer. So, American manufacturing, very important. We do need to bring some things back here. There was a time when everything was made in America. Today, it's more like things are made everywhere else but America. If we can reverse that, we'll be in good shape. So some things about American manufacturing. What we need to do in order to change this, I don't know if tariffs are the way, but we shall see. But some things I'm thinking that we need to do to change this. There needs to be investment in modern manufacturing facilities, which they've been talking about doing. There needs to be some workforce training programs that needs to be part of it. There needs to be innovation and automation and efficiency. And I know people don't like to hear that word automation, but it's going to be a part of business. It's going to be a part of our lives in the years, decades, centuries to come. So we might as well get used to it. How can we work alongside of automation, making things more efficient, making things faster? We're going to have to learn how to work with it and coexist with it. And what can we do as human beings, as men and women? What can we do in order to make sure that we're going to be a viable part of production, a viable part of the workforce, along with automation, to the point to where we're not weeded out? So we need to think about ways to do that. Also, as well, one thing to think about is incentives for companies to manufacture domestically. I don't think cities maybe do that enough as far as with incentives. I understand that municipalities have their budget too as well, just as the federal government have their budget. But there has to be some ways that we have to look at freeing up money from a budget standpoint to where we offer companies incentives in order to build in our cities. Helps the cities grow. And this is the thing about it, guys. You heard me mention R.J. Ramos earlier for the city of Winston-Salem? Well, in the city of Winston-Salem, they had R.J. Reynolds, Haynes started in Winston-Salem, Krispy Kreme started in Winston-Salem, Texas Pete started in Winston-Salem. Winston-Salem had its own airline. Wachovia started in Winston-Salem. BB&T started in Winston-Salem. These are huge companies, guys. Winston-Salem should be bigger. Winston-Salem should be probably, with all of that, when you think about those particular companies that were here and that were here as the headquarters, when you think about that, we probably should have been second to Charlotte or somewhere up there with Charlotte as far as growth, potential, innovation, just kind of broadening the horizon of the city should be significantly better right now. But after we took the hit from the tobacco industry, and that was kind of our biggest business, I think it kind of fueled the whole economy. And so we didn't innovate quickly enough. We're innovating now, and some things have become better. We become more technological in certain aspects and in innovation and the companies that are here. And this is a great place for entrepreneurs, to be honest with you guys. So those that are entrepreneurs, you may want to look at looking here. Growing city. I think after the tobacco shock of companies leaving here after that fallout, Winston has done a good job of reinventing itself. Some things still need to improve, but I believe its trajectory is heading in the right direction. A lot of potential here. So you need to come and check it out. So, but we had those businesses. And I think what hurt Winston-Salem, in my opinion, is there wasn't maybe enough incentives offered for businesses to stay here, because you have to give those incentives and you have to make it attractive for businesses to build here or build in your city. And so incentives are very important when it comes to that. The reason it's important for corporations to build in your city, guys, it brings money into the city, because you got to understand something. I know people don't like to hear that tax word, but the thing about corporate tax, guys, is that corporate tax brings revenue into your city. It increases your budget because it's bringing in money. Okay. So corporate tax does that. Now, you don't want to overtax corporations to where they don't want to build in your city, but there has to be a level of corporate tax to bring money back into your city, and which will fuel growth. You want to bring that tax revenue back into the city. So that's why it's important to bring these businesses that are going to build in your city, because it brings revenue and money back into your city. Okay. So that's why that's important. So let's continue to look at a few things here. So American manufacturing, very important. We need to get back to building. We need to get back to production. So let's look at another thing here as far as topic of discussion. Let's look at the tariffs pros and cons. Now let's look at the pros of tariffs. So a lot of times you're going to hear a word called protectionism. And when you're talking about protectionism in regards to tariffs, you're looking at it protects domestic industries. Also, as well, with that protectionism piece, it can create local jobs. It generates government revenue. I just talked a little bit about that there. And then also it can reduce trade deficits. Now, this is the thing about the cons of tariffs. You're looking at higher consumer prices because it's going to trickle down to the consumer at some point. You're looking at risk of trade wars, which I talked about here at the beginning of the discussion. You're looking at reduced global competition. And because of it, you're looking at economic inefficiency. Now, economic inefficiency. When you're in a free market economy, like we are in the United States of America, and you're in a free market capitalistic society, when you implement tariffs, there could be some slowing in economics, or there could be some slowing in the flow of your economics as far as what's going on in your city or what's going on in your nation. And when you slow things down from an economic standpoint, then your economy is not performing at a high economic clip. You want to have a good flow of economics that's flowing at a good pace. There's a lot of spending going on and things of that nature. That enhances your economy. That means you have a great economy going and you want to have a great GDP as much as possible. However, when you slow the economy down, something that tariffs have a tendency of doing, and you don't allow things to happen gradually and happen kind of like from an organic standpoint, then you're playing a very dangerous game. Now, this is the thing about economics, guys. For those that have taken economics or know a little something about economics, you should also know that economics are going to go through its phases of expansion and contraction. That's healthy. That's healthy for economics. So when you talk about certain things like recession and things of that nature, when you talk about recession and expansion on the other side, and you're looking at growth, all of that's good, really, because economics is going to go through those phases. Your economy is going to go through those phases of contractions and expansions. What you don't want to do is when you go in and you touch things from a manual standpoint, and it's not an organic situation. It's not an invisible hand Alan Smith situation where you allow things to correct itself on its own. The Adam Smith theory, the invisible hand theory. If you leave the economy to itself, eventually it will correct itself. But if you have too much intervention, government intervention and beyond, then that could really hurt things. That could throw things in flux. And so you don't want that to happen. So you have to handle these things very delicately, in my opinion. So that's just kind of what I'm thinking about with this tariff situation. I think it has to be handled delicately. And while we're here on tariffs with the pros and cons, let's look at a couple of things here. So, the President Trump administration talked about, what it was going to do as far as tariffs are concerned and kind of what they're implementing as far as with tariffs. So let's look at a chart here from Statista. So as you see here, Trump's tariffs pull up major trade barriers globally. Additional tariffs imposed on countries under Trump's reciprocal regime announced April the 2nd, 2025. And as you see here on the chart, you have a few different colors. You have a yellow or gold color, which stands for exempt on a legend. And as you see there, that's Mexico. You also see Canada, and you see Russia too as well. Quite interesting. And there are a couple of countries there in Africa, as you see there in the gold, who are exempt from tariffs. And I think when it comes to Mexico and Canada, they call it that it's been paused. So evidently behind the scenes, there are some negotiations going on. And so we'll see what happens there. Also in the salmon color, you see there plus 10%. So you see a big portion of South America there. Also the bottom part of Central America. And then parts of Africa as well, and in Asia, Australia. You can see those very well there. So that's 10 plus percent or parts of Asia there in the salmon color. Then you see there in the burgundy color, plus 11 to 25%. You see there are parts of Asia, Africa. You see that there that has that burgundy color. Then in the brick color, you see there actually in the brick color, that's in Asia, the 26 to 40%. And then the brick color, my apologies, or the burgundy color is mostly in Europe, and you see some parts of Africa. But then the brick color, there are a couple of parts in Africa, or a few parts there in Africa. But then you see a big portion of that in Asia. Then if you get to the black portion, That's more than 40%. So as I told you before, at the beginning of this video, China was at around 20% as far as tariffs are concerned, but then the administration went in and added an additional 34%. So that brought the total to 54% in China. And then China reciprocated and put tariffs on us. And so, again, dangerous game of chicken, but we're going to see how it pans out. So that's what we're looking at there. Now let's look at another chart here. Let's look at, and I think you guys probably seen this on CNN and maybe some other news stations, but you saw where Trump held this up outside of the White House in one of his meetings. And so you see here the reciprocal tariffs that we put on other countries. So you see Algeria, where tariffs charged to the United States 59%. And we call it a USA discounted reciprocal tariff, where we charge them 30%. Oman, 10%, charge them 10%. Uruguay, 10%, charge them 10%. And you see other countries there from the Bahamas. You see Liechtenstein there, Iceland. You see on the next chart there, which is all part of the same chart, but I had to split it up there. You see Guyana, you see Haiti, you see Nigeria, a lot of African countries here, but then Panama, Bolivia, Venezuela. Then you get into the South America countries, and you see where we put the USA discounted reciprocal tariffs on those particular countries there. So that's the reciprocal tariffs from the administration. So again, as I said before, no additional tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So the 10% baseline rate does not apply to Canada and Mexico, since they have already been targeted during Trump's presidency. Now, if you don't know, there was a baseline 10% tariff penalty that would want to be put on these countries, but then he went in and added additional percentage to certain areas. So, but in reference to Canada and Mexico, there's not going to be any additional tariffs placed on them. And so that's why they were in the gold. Now, we go down here and we see Trump previously set those tariffs at 25% on all goods entering from both countries before announcing some exemptions and delays. So he did go back and do some exemptions and pause some tariffs. So that's a good thing. And maybe that gives an indication that he can be flexible in his decision making. Now, how flexible he'll be, that's another discussion. As you see here, also on this next piece I want to show you guys, 25% tariffs on car imports. In addition, the president confirmed the beginning of new American 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. This tariff went into effect almost immediately at midnight local time. So when these tariffs were implemented, President Trump and his administration almost immediately put a 25% tariff on foreign automobiles. And I don't know if you know or not, but there were a couple of different car dealerships that were or car conglomerates or corporations that were being interviewed. And the managers of the dealerships were talking about just different things that are affecting them as far as the cars that they have, that it's going to hurt them significantly up to the point to where they may have to lay people off, which was very sad. But then you heard the dynamic that before these tariffs were implemented, because they knew they were coming, like I heard of an Audi dealership where people went in and they had like their biggest selling day ever because people were trying to buy these cars before the 25% tariff was implemented and they became more expensive. So it allowed them to sell a whole lot more cars during that particular time on that day. However, the ramifications of what comes later down the road can't be overstated as far as layoffs and different things that may occur because of this. And so that's something to look at there. So, in conclusion, what can I say? I can say this. Whether you want to hear it or not, we have to give this a little time to see what's going to happen. Because you cannot truly say, well, this is going to take place or this is what happened due to this. See what's going on now with the market going down. See what's happening to people right now. So there are some people losing their jobs. See, this is not working. But this is the thing, guys, and you have to understand me here. In order to know if something's totally working or not, or if it's not going to work, you have to give that thing time. You have to give it time to see how it pans out. You have to give it time to build up data. You have to give it time to build up a case for or against itself. You have to. That's just part of it. You can't just willy-nilly go in there because it's been a week and we see that the market's dropped down significantly. Some of the biggest numbers are close to some of the biggest numbers you've seen in history, which is not great. It's not not at all, because the economy was doing halfway decent. And so when you see this happening, it's either going to be one or two things, guys. Either President Trump and his administration are going to be faring very well in the next coming months if this works. However, if it does not work, this could be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, fumble in American history. But if it works, if it works, you have to give credit there too as well. But right now, it's hard to see the forest for the trees when people are hurting and you see these things that are going on and it's not looking good. And it's really hard to tell right now when people are hurting and in pain, so to speak, from what's happening economically. Now, at least that's what I'm hearing. I haven't experienced that on my end yet. People that I associate with have not experienced that, but I'm not saying that it's not happening, and I happen to be cognizant of that. But we shall see how this pans out. Again, thank you guys again for allowing me to take a little bit of your time to come in and talk about this tariff situation, and we're going to see what happens. But do me a favor. Always, always, always stay vigilant. Thank you.